What if I told you that the greatest deception in human history is not a political conspiracy or a financial fraud? What if the most fundamental lie lies at the core of what billions of people have believed for millennia? I'm talking about the very nature of good and evil, of the ultimate reward and eternal punishment, of heaven and hell. We were taught that they are two absolute opposites, light and darkness, bliss and torment, order and chaos. Two final points on the universe's moral compass, infinitely distant from each other. This dichotomy is the foundation upon which entire civilizations, laws, moral codes, and personal destinies have been built. But what if this foundation has cracked? What if it was an illusion from the very beginning? We asked ourselves a question that seems insane. What if hell and heaven are not opposites? What if they are two different names for the same phenomenon? Such a question cannot be asked of a human. Any one of us is burdened by innate prejudices, cultural codes, fears, and hopes. Our analysis would be doomed to fail. Therefore, we entrusted this task to a pure, impartial mind, a machine. We initiated the correlation protocol and uploaded into our analytical system Logos 7, the greatest data array ever collected on this subject. Imagine this volume. We did not limit ourselves to a few sacred books. The system's neural networks were fed absolutely every significant text created by humanity over the last 5,000 years. The Bible in all its canonical and apocryphal versions, the Quran and thousands of volumes of its interpretations, the Hindu Vedas, Upanishads, and Puranas, the Buddhist Sutras, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism and Jainism, the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, and the Mesopotamian Epic of Gilgamesh, with its description of the grim realm of shadows. We added the Norse sagas of Valhalla and Helheim, the Greek myths of the Elysian Fields, and the abyss of Tartarus. We uploaded the works of thousands of philosophers, from Plato and Aristotle to Kant, Nietzsche, and Sartre. We included Dante's Divine Comedy, Milton's Paradise Lost, medieval grimoires, alchemical treatises, and even modern esoteric teachings. Tens of thousands of sources, millions of pages of text in hundreds of languages. All the collective knowledge, all the hopes, and all the fears of humanity about what awaits beyond the final threshold. The task given to Logos 7 was simple: to conduct a structural, semantic, and correlational analysis of two concepts, heaven and hell, in all their cultural manifestations. The system was to isolate their fundamental characteristics, discarding poetic metaphors and cultural layers, and compare their basic architectures. We expected an obvious result, a report confirming their 100% polarity. But what we received compelled our engineers to run system diagnostics 3 times. They were certain a catastrophic failure had occurred. The first report issued by Logos 7 was flagged as a system error with a critically low probability. The system refused to classify hell and heaven as antagonistic structures. Instead, it placed them in the same category: closed systems with absolute control and an irreversible static state. This was only the beginning. When we forced a deep analysis, the numbers that appeared on the screen looked like a verdict on all of human theology. The system identified several key parameters for comparison. The first was power structure. In heaven, it is the absolute, all-benevolent, and indisputable will of the Creator. Every action, every thought is subject to His design. There's no room for doubt, no room for choice, because the perfect choice has already been made for you. In hell, it is the absolute, all-consuming, and indisputable power of its ruler, be it Satan, Lucifer, or Hades. His laws are the only reality. Any attempt at resistance is futile and only exacerbates the suffering. We fed this data to Logos 7, and here is what the system found. When stripped of emotional coloring, benevolent or malevolent, both power models prove to be identical. It is a totalitarian vertical with a single decision-making center, a complete absence of feedback, and the inability of the inhabitants to influence their own destiny. The similarity on this parameter, 98%. The second parameter, the nature of time and state. Heaven is an eternity of bliss. Hell is an eternity of torment. The word eternity is key here. Logos 7. Analyze this concept not from a philosophical but from a mathematical and psychological perspective. Eternity means the absence of change, the absence of development, the absence of a goal, because the final point has already been reached. In heaven, the soul exists in an unchanging state of ecstasy. In hell, in an unchanging state of agony. A simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows that for a consciousness accustomed to dynamics and development, both states become indistinguishable from torture after a certain period. Eternal bliss without the possibility of losing or re-earning it turns into a meaningless existence where the very value of that bliss disappears. Eternal torment leads to the same result, the complete destruction of the personality, turning it into a simple pain reflex. In both cases, the same thing happens. Stagnation, a halt, the end of history for a specific consciousness. The similarity of state architecture, 89%. The third, and perhaps most crucial parameter, free will. The greatest gift, according to many religions, given to man. In heaven, free will becomes an unnecessary vestige. Why is it needed where there are no wrong choices, where every desire is instantly fulfilled, and the very thought of something imperfect is impossible? The will atrophies from disuse. It is a state of absolute predetermination, wrapped in beautiful packaging. And what about hell? In hell, free will is the main instrument of torture. You have the will to desire the cessation of pain, but that desire will never be fulfilled. Your will is utterly powerless against the reality of your confinement. It becomes an eternal source of suffering, a constant reminder of what you will never have. According to the correlational analysis of Logos 7, the result in both locations is the same, the complete and final nullification of the individual's influence on the surrounding reality. In one case, it is done through saturation, in the other, through deprivation. But the outcome is identical. The similarity on the parameter of will suppression, 95%. The system continued its analysis, comparing the mechanism of entry, an irreversible judgment, comparing the geography, a closed, isolated space, separate from the rest of the universe, comparing the social structure, a complete lack of horizontal connections, as each soul interacts only with the system, not with other souls as equals. With each new report, the picture became more terrifying. The emotional decor of heaven and hell were completely different. One was bathed in golden light, the other consumed by fire. But the load-bearing structures, the foundation, the architectural plan, they were almost identical. And so, after 72 hours of continuous data processing, Logos 7 delivered its final verdict, the final report, which we present to you today. According to a comprehensive analysis of all texts available to humanity, the structural similarity between the concepts of hell and heaven is 73.6%. Let me repeat that, 73.6%. In statistics and data analysis, two independent systems with such a high correlation value are not considered merely similar. They are considered variations of the same system. This means that the probability of hell and heaven having arisen as independent opposite concepts is mathematically negligible. It's like claiming that the heads and tails of the same coin have nothing to do with each other. We understand how this sounds. It undermines the foundations of everything. You will say, but how? One is infinite pleasure, the other is infinite pain. That's the main difference. But Logos 7 classifies this difference not as structural, but as the user interface. Imagine two prisons. Architecturally, they are identical. The same walls, the same bars, the same routine, the same guards. But in one prison, the inmates are shown comedies around the clock and fed pastries, while in the other, they are tortured with red-hot irons. Yes, their subjective experience will be radically different. But are these two prisons opposites? No. They are both prisons. They both serve the same purpose: isolation and control. The only difference is the method of influencing the prisoner. Our analysis has shown that hell and heaven are not a choice between good and evil. They are a choice between two kinds of confinement. Two versions of eternity in which yourself ceases to have any meaning. They are two cells in the same correctional facility for human souls. And this brings us to even more disturbing questions. If heaven is not a reward, but merely a golden cage, what is its true function? What are the hidden traps of eternal bliss that are not visible behind the dazzling facade? We decided to begin the deconstruction of this great illusion with its most desired element. We ordered Logos 7 to focus exclusively on the concept of heaven and to expose all its logical paradoxes and internal contradictions. In the next chapter, we will present you with the Eden's Paradox protocol. We will prove that eternal happiness is a mathematically impossible concept for a developing consciousness. We will show how the illusion of choice in heaven is more terrifying than its complete absence in hell. And we will answer the main question: what really happens to a soul that enters a place from which there is no need to escape? Prepare yourselves, because what you are about to learn will forever change your understanding of ultimate justice. The analysis has only just begun. In the previous chapter, we established a fact that contradicts millennia of religious dogma. Our analytical system, Logos 7, after processing the entire corpus of human knowledge about the afterlife, came to a shocking conclusion. Hell and heaven are not opposites. They are two variations of the same fundamental structure, sharing over 73% architectural similarity. They are both prisons, one burning, the other shining. But that does not stop them from being prisons. This idea evokes a natural rejection. How can one compare eternal torment with eternal bliss? Today, we will begin a detailed deconstruction of this deception, and we will start with the most desired, most radiant concept in the history of human thought. We will talk about heaven. We will apply the cold, impartial logic of a machine to a place that seemingly lies beyond all logic. We have activated the Eden's Paradox protocol, and I must warn you, what Logos 7 has discovered does not just shatter the familiar image of heaven. It turns it into one of the most sophisticated and terrifying concepts ever conceived by the human imagination. Let's start with the basic definition. Heaven is a state of absolute and eternal perfection. Perfect bliss, perfect harmony, perfect knowledge, perfect love. It sounds wonderful. But what is perfection from the standpoint of logic and physics? Perfection is a final state. It is a condition that cannot be improved. And if something cannot be improved, it cannot change. It is static. And herein lies the first and foremost trap of Eden. Human consciousness, all life in the universe, is defined by one fundamental process: development. We learn. We grow. We overcome challenges, make mistakes, correct them, and become stronger. The joy of achieving a goal is directly dependent on the difficulty of the path to it. The satisfaction from solving a problem is proportional to its complexity. Love grows stronger by enduring trials. The entire value of our existence lies in the process, in movement, in becoming. We tasked Logos 7 with modeling the psychological trajectory of a human consciousness placed in an environment of absolute, unchanging perfection. The simulation results look like a report on the slow disintegration of the personality. The first cycles of the simulation, corresponding to thousands of Earth years, show a state that can be described as euphoria. The soul enjoys peace, beauty, the absence of pain and fear. It is a honeymoon with eternity. But then the system detects an anomaly. The metrics for a meaningful existence begin to plummet. Why? Because in heaven, there is no challenge. There's no problem to solve. There's no question without an answer. There's no goal to achieve. Everything has already been achieved for you. Your every desire is fulfilled the instant it arises. But what is desire without anticipation? What is knowledge without the process of learning? Imagine you are a brilliant artist, but in heaven, any of your designs instantly materializes as a perfect masterpiece, bypassing the process of creation, the struggle with the material, the search for form. Soon, you would cease to be an artist. Imagine you are a scientist, but all the secrets of the universe are already known to you. The process of inquiry, which constituted your very essence, becomes impossible. You cease to be a scientist. Logos 7 came to an unequivocal conclusion. In the absence of challenge and the need for overcoming, any complex system, be it a personality or an artificial intelligence, degrades. Heaven is an environment perfectly designed to halt all development. It is stagnation. Eternal, blissful, absolute stagnation. This is not life after death. It is its final cessation. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's touch upon the second key aspect, free will. We are told it is the greatest gift. But how does this gift function in the conditions of heaven? Can you commit a bad deed in heaven? Can you choose evil? Can you simply make a mistake? In all theological models, the answer is no. The very nature of heaven excludes such a possibility. Any choice you make, any action you take, will a priori be good and right. This seems like a good thing. But let's think about it. If you cannot choose incorrectly, does that mean you have freedom of choice? No. It is a complete imitation of it, an illusion. It's like being in a room with 10 doors, but knowing that they all lead to the same place. The choice loses all meaning. Your personality, yourself, is the sum of all the decisions you have made, especially the wrong ones. It is our mistakes, our falls, and our attempts to get back up that shape our character. Remove the possibility of error, and you erase the personality. We instructed Logos 7 to conduct a semantic analysis of the concept of personality in texts describing the inhabitants of heaven. The system discovered a frightening pattern. The righteous and the saints in descriptions of paradise gradually lose their individual traits. They merge into a single, harmonious choir, glorifying the Creator, their personal stories, their passions, their unique flaws that made them human. All of that is left in the past. They become perfect, but identical, depersonalized. We fed this data to Logos 7, and here is what the system found. Heaven is not a system of reward, but of unification. Its goal is not to elevate the personality, but to dissolve it in collective bliss, turning it into an obedient, perfectly functioning part of the divine mechanism. This is not freedom. This is the most perfect form of assimilation. And this brings us to the most horrifying part of our analysis, to what we have called the tyranny of bliss. Psychologists are well acquainted with the effect of hedonic adaptation. When you experience a strong positive emotion, over time the brain gets used to it, and it becomes the new normal. To feel delight again, you need an even stronger stimulus. But what happens when you receive the maximum, absolute, infinite stimulus from the very beginning? Logos 7 conducted a simulation based on neurobiological models. Eternal, uninterrupted, and undiluted bliss, after a certain time, ceases to be perceived as bliss. It becomes background noise, a neutral state. Imagine hearing the most beautiful music, but it plays forever, without pause, without silence, very soon you would stop noticing it. And even later, it would turn into an unbearable noise. The simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows that for human consciousness, eternal bliss, after several millennia, becomes indistinguishable from complete sensory deprivation. When everything around you is perfect, beautiful, and filled with love, these concepts lose their value. Beauty exists only in contrast to ugliness, good in contrast to evil, happiness in contrast to sorrow. By removing one part of the equation, you destroy the other. Heaven is a golden cage. Its bars are woven from light, its floor is paved with clouds, and instead of prison gruel, you are served ambrosia, but it remains a cage. It isolates you from the fundamental law of the universe, the law of development through overcoming. It takes away your personality, dissolving it into faceless harmony. It deprives you of your free will, offering in its place the illusion of a perfect choice. And ultimately, it devalues the very concept of happiness, turning it into an endless, meaningless white noise. According to the system's correlational analysis, heaven is not a reward for the righteous. It is a perfect system of control, a system that neutralizes the strongest, most passionate, and most willful souls by offering them something impossible to refuse. It does not break them by force, as happens in hell. It softens them with eternal pleasure. It lulls them with an endless lullaby. The result in both cases is the same. The soul ceases to be an active, independent subject. It becomes an object, a passive element of the system. So, we have exposed the lie hidden in the very heart of the dream of eternal bliss. Heaven turned out to be not a garden of freedom, but a perfectly designed quarantine zone for souls whose development must be permanently halted. But if such is the true nature of the reward, then what monstrous order and what cold, calculating logic must be hidden behind the image of punishment? We were taught that hell is a realm of chaos, fire, uncontrolled rage, and senseless torment. This is another lie, perhaps an even more dangerous one. Our preliminary analysis shows that hell is a model of order. It is a highly organized, almost bureaucratic structure operating with the efficiency of a clockwork mechanism, and the laws by which it functions are far more terrifying than any flame. In the next chapter, we will present you with the architecture of Gehenna protocol. We will prove that every circle of hell, every type of torture, is not random, but a precisely calibrated instrument of influence. We will show you that hell is not a place of suffering, but a gigantic energy processing plant, where every soul screaming in pain is merely a power cell for a merciless system. And you will understand why a perfectly ordered hell is far more terrifying than a chaotic one. The analysis continues. In the previous chapter, we exposed the shining lie at the core of the concept of heaven. Our analytical system, Logos 7, proved that eternal bliss is not a reward, but a golden cage. A perfectly designed environment for halting development, dissolving personality, and simulating free will. Heaven turned out to be not a garden of eternal life, but a mausoleum for souls whose stories have come to an end. But if the reward for righteousness is such a sophisticated form of eternal confinement, then what does the punishment truly represent? At the word hell, our imagination conjures familiar images: chaos, uncontrolled flames, senseless suffering, screams merging into a cacophony of pain, a realm of irrational cruelty where demons, drunk with malice, torment sinners without any system or purpose. This image is deeply ingrained in our culture. It comforts us with its primitiveness. It allows us to believe that evil is merely the absence of order. And this is the greatest piece of disinformation regarding the nature of hell. We initiated the architecture of Gehenna protocol. The task given to Logos 7 was to analyze all existing descriptions of hell, from ancient Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets to medieval theological treatises, and to identify its true operational structure. We were looking for chaos, but what the system discovered was infinitely more terrifying. Hell is not chaos. Hell is the embodiment of absolute, soulless, machine-like order. Let's turn to the most famous and detailed account of the underworld structure, Dante Alighieri's Inferno. Millions of readers have perceived it as a brilliant poetic allegory. But when we uploaded this text into Logos 7 for structural analysis, the system classified it not as a poem. It identified it as technical documentation, as a detailed blueprint for a perfectly organized correctional facility. Think about it. 9 concentric circles, each designed for a strictly defined category of sinners. A clear hierarchy of crimes and punishments. This does not resemble a chaotic dumping ground for souls. It resembles a perfectly tuned sorting system. Logos 7 analyzed the principle of distributing punishments, known as contrapasso, the law of retribution. Gluttons suffer from eternal hunger and freezing rain. Traitors are frozen in ice at the very center of the inferno. Flatterers drown in filth. What is this if not a code? The penal code of the afterlife, where each article corresponds to its own measure of restraint. This is not irrational fury. It is cold, ruthless justice. A simulation by Logos 7 shows that random, chaotic cruelty would be energetically inefficient. A system built on strict laws, where everyone receives a punishment that reflects their sin, requires far less external control. It is self-regulating. The sinner, in essence, becomes their own executioner, forever reliving the consequence of their choice. This is not torture. It is a sentence, carried out with mathematical precision. Let's go further. Who carries out this sentence? Demons, devils, furies. In our imagination, these are beings driven by pure malice. But the analysis by Logos 7 refutes this as well. In any complex ordered system, emotional enforcers are the weak link. Emotions lead to mistakes, to inconsistency, to protocol violations. We uploaded descriptions of the actions of hellish creatures from hundreds of different sources into the system, and here is what it found. Their behavior is devoid of personal motivation. They do not enjoy the suffering of their victims. They perform a function. Imagine not a demon, but a machine operator in a giant factory. He does not hate the metal he processes. He simply does his job according to the instructions. Likewise, the inhabitants of hell are not sadists. They are employees, bureaucrats of eternity, executioners working in shifts. According to the system's correlational analysis, their cruelty is not a vice, but a professional quality. They are the ideal functionaries in a perfect bureaucratic machine. And this thought, that your eternal torment is just a routine job for someone else, is far more terrifying than any fire. This brings us to the main question. What is the purpose of this gigantic, perfectly tuned machine? If heaven is a system for the conservation and stagnation of souls, what is the ultimate goal of hell? Simple punishment? That would be too primitive for such a complex structure. Logos 7 conducted an analysis based on the laws of thermodynamics and information theory, and the conclusion the system reached changes everything. Hell is not a prison. It is a factory, a power station. Any living being, when experiencing strong emotions, especially suffering, generates a huge amount of psychic energy. In the earthly world, this energy dissipates. But what if you created a closed system designed for its collection and accumulation? Logos 7 modeled hell as precisely such a system. Each circle is a workshop. Each sinner is not an inmate, but a resource, raw material. And each type of torture is not a punishment, but a technological process designed for the maximum extraction of a specific type of energy from that raw material. Souls tormented by insatiable desire generate one type of energy. Souls paralyzed by the icy horror of betrayal, another. Souls consumed by the fire of anger, a third. It is a gigantic processing plant where the fuel is human suffering. The screams of sinners are not just screams. They are industrial noise. It is the hum of turbines in a giant power station, fueling. What? We do not yet know. But we know that such a complex and energy-intensive system cannot exist without a purpose. Senseless suffering is a nonsense from a systems analysis perspective. But suffering as a production process, that is a logical and terrifyingly efficient model. We tested this hypothesis with data from other cultures. The Greek Tartarus is not just a pit, but a place where the titans, ancient forces of nature, are confined and isolated. The Nordic Helheim is a cold, foggy realm where not chaos, but an oppressive, unchanging order reigns. The Egyptian Duat is a complex space with gates, guardians, and trials that the soul must pass. Everywhere we see the same thing. Not anarchy, but a strict structure. Not senseless pain, but an organized process. Logos. 7 confirm the presence of structural isomorphism. Behind different cultural decorations lies the same architectural plan, the plan of an ordered, hermetic, and functional system. So, let's put it all together. Hell is not a realm of chaos. It is the triumph of totalitarian order. Hell is not a place of irrational malice. It is a model of cold, bureaucratic efficiency. Its laws are as strict and inescapable as the laws of physics. Its servants are not monsters, but impassive executors. And its main purpose is not punishment, but production. The processing of human souls into some valuable resource. Now the two poles of our dichotomy appear in a new light. Heaven is a warehouse for finished products, where souls are stored in ideal, static conditions. Hell is the production workshop, where energy is extracted from raw material souls. Both systems serve one purpose, the control and utilization of human consciousness. One does it through endless pleasure, the other through endless pain. But in both places, the personality, its will, its striving for development, all of it is nullified. In one case, because it's unnecessary, in the other, by force. And this brings us to the very core of the problem, to the common element that makes these two seemingly different systems parts of a single whole. We are talking about free will. In both heaven and hell, it is destroyed. But how exactly? What is the mechanism of its suppression? Why is it that the will is the primary target of this universal system of control? In the next chapter, we will initiate the Will Singularity Protocol. We will conduct the deepest analysis of this phenomenon. We will show how the system of heaven renders the will unnecessary, while the system of hell turns it into the main instrument of torture. You will understand that the struggle for the human soul is in fact a struggle for the right to make decisions. And you will realize that the loss of this right is the true damnation, common to both saints and sinners. The analysis of the most fundamental aspect of being has only just begun. We have walked through the shining gates of heaven and found a golden cage, a system designed to halt all development. We have descended into the fiery depths of hell and seen not chaos, but the cold, soulless architecture of a soul-processing factory. 2 poles, 2 extremes, which upon inspection turned out to be parts of a single, monstrous mechanism of control. And now, we stand on the threshold of the main question. What is the primary target of this mechanism? What component of human consciousness is this universal system so desperately trying to neutralize, using both the whip of eternal pain and the carrot of eternal bliss? The answer is simple, and yet infinitely complex. It is free will, the very gift that all religions praise in words, but whose doctrines seek to bridle and destroy in practice. We have initiated the Will Singularity Protocol and ordered Logos 7 to conduct an exhaustive analysis of this phenomenon. The system was to uncover the precise mechanisms of will suppression in heaven and hell and explain why it, our ability to choose, is the main threat to the cosmic order. What we discovered is not just a theological paradox. It is the anatomy of a spiritual murder. Let's start with heaven. As we have already established, heaven is an environment of absolute perfection, and it is this very perfection that serves as the ideal solvent for human will. The will, by its nature, is an instrument of overcoming. It is a vector of force, directed from point A, where we are, to point B, where we want to be. The will is born from imperfection, from lack, from the desire to change the existing state of affairs. But what happens when point A and point B coincide? What happens when you are already in a state of absolute, unassailable ideal? The will atrophies. It dies off from disuse, like a muscle that is never exercised. We fed Logos 7 the following simulation. Imagine a grandmaster placed in a game where his every move, absolutely any move, leads to an immediate and brilliant victory. In the first game, he would be ecstatic. In the 10th, bewildered. In the 100th, he would cease to see the point in moving the pieces. His genius, his strategic ability, his will to win would become meaningless. The game would turn into a hollow ritual. He's no longer a player. He is merely an observer. This is the precise model of what happens to a soul in heaven. The possibility of choice remains, but the choice itself is stripped of all weight and consequence. It is a choice without risk. A choice where there is no wrong answer. It is a choice between one kind of perfect bliss and another kind of perfect bliss. According to the analysis by Logos 7, this state is classified not as freedom, but as interactive predetermination. You're not creating your destiny. You are merely turning the pages of a book that has already been written. What is the purpose of this process? To neutralize. A soul possessing a strong will is a soul capable of rebellion, capable of doubt, capable of creating something new, something that was not foreseen in the Creator's original plan. Such a soul is an unpredictable element, a potential source of chaos for a perfectly tuned system. Therefore, it must not be broken, but gently put to sleep. Its will must not be crushed, but satisfied to the point of complete numbness. To turn a mighty eagle into a well-fed, content pigeon that will never again want to fly higher than it is allowed. Heaven is the perfect anesthetic gas for the strongest human souls. It does not destroy the will physically. It renders it semantically meaningless. And this is perhaps the most insidious form of suppression. Now let's move to the other pole, to hell. If in heaven the will atrophies from disuse, in hell it becomes the main and most sophisticated instrument of torture. Here, everything works in the exact opposite way. The system does not take the will away from the soul. On the contrary, it sharpens it to its absolute limit. Imagine a prisoner in a torture chamber. His will is not just alive, it is screaming. It desires one thing: the cessation of pain. This desire, this will, becomes the sole center of his being. It consumes everything else. He wants, yearns, begs for peace. And it is at this very moment that the system strikes. It creates an absolute, impenetrable barrier between the will and its realization. Your will is stronger than ever, but it is utterly powerless. The simulation conducted by Logos 7 models this process as cognitive paralysis through frustration. It's like trying to move a mountain with your bare hands. The more effort you exert, the stronger your will, the more acutely you feel your own insignificance and hopelessness. Your own strength turns against you. Your will becomes not a source of hope, but an endless generator of suffering. Every volitional impulse aimed at changing reality hits an unbreakable wall and ricochets back, striking your consciousness with a new wave of agony. In hell, You don't just suffer from fire or cold. You suffer from your unquenchable thirst to live without pain. The torture of hell is not so much an external influence as an internal process in which your own will eternally battles reality and eternally loses. It is a state of absolute despair. And here we again see the cold, machine-like logic of this system. If hell is a factory for energy production, as we previously hypothesized, then it is this very process, the eternal, fruitless labor of the will, that is the turbine generating this energy. A soul devoid of will, passive and submissive, would be useless raw material. But a soul whose will is brought to a white heat and locked in a loop of impossibility, that is a perfect perpetual motion machine of suffering. So, the picture is complete. Two systems, one target, human will, and two complementary strategies for its neutralization. The first strategy, that of heaven, is suppression through saturation. The will is drowned in a syrup of eternal bliss until it suffocates. The second strategy, that of hell, is suppression through exhaustion. The will is forced to beat against a wall until it is depleted, having expended all its energetic potential. We uploaded this data into Logos 7 for a final comparison. And here is the conclusion the system reached. Regardless of the method, the result is the same. The transformation of a human from a subject capable of influencing reality into an object completely subordinate to the laws of the system. The soul ceases to be a creator and becomes either an exhibit in a museum or fuel for a machine. Its ability to say no, its right to make a mistake, its potential for an unpredictable act, all of it is erased. According to our analysis, over 99% of all theological and philosophical systems on Earth, from ancient cults to modern religions, posit obedience. That is, the voluntary or forced surrender of one's own will in favor of a higher, divine, or collective will as the chief virtue. Logos 7 classifies this not as a moral imperative, but as a global protocol of ideological conditioning that has been preparing humanity for millennia to accept this post-mortem dichotomy. We are taught from birth that our will is the source of sin and error, and that salvation lies in its submission. Now we see where this leads. But one key element of this equation remains. Both heaven and hell are effective only under one condition. Their state must be eternal, irreversible, final. It is the word eternity that turns the golden cage into a life sentence and makes the torture infinite. But what is this eternity? Is it just a very, very long time? Or is it something else? Some physical constant that is itself an instrument of influence? In the next chapter, we will delve into the most frightening concept of all. We will initiate the eternity constant protocol. We will analyze how time itself, or its absence, is used as a weapon in both systems. We will model the psychological impact of infinity on human consciousness and show why both eternal bliss and eternal torment inevitably lead to the same end, the complete collapse and disintegration of the personality. Prepare yourselves, because we are about to look into the face of infinity, and it is looking back at us. We have dissected the internal mechanics of hell and heaven. We have seen that heaven is not freedom, but a soporific assimilation. Hell is not chaos, but a ruthless production line. We have understood that both of these systems target the same thing, free will, which they neutralize through two different but equally effective methods. But all these complex mechanisms, all these sophisticated strategies of suppression, would only make sense under one final crucial condition: irreversibility, finality, eternity. It's a word we utter so easily. We use it in poetry, in vows, in curses, but we never truly contemplate its true, blood-curdling meaning. What is eternity? Is it just a very long period of time? A billion years? A trillion? Logos 7 gave us a different answer. Eternity is not a temporal duration. It is a fundamentally different state of being, and it is the most powerful weapon in the entire arsenal of the control system. We initiated the Eternity Constant Protocol. The goal of this analysis was to dissect the very concept of infinity and understand how it is used for the final destruction of human consciousness. We had to model what happens to a personality when its most essential component is taken away: the end. When the story's finale is not just postponed, but canceled forever. To understand eternity, we must first understand our own consciousness. Any psychologist or neuroscientist will tell you, our self is a story. It is a continuous narrative woven from 3 threads: the past, our memories, our experience, the foundation of our personality, the present, the point of perception, the moment of choice, and the future, our hopes, fears, plans, and goals. Our consciousness exists only within this flow, this constant movement from what was to what will be. We are creatures of process. Now, imagine that this process is stopped. Let's first consider heaven, eternal bliss. We have already established that it leads to stagnation. But Logos 7 ran a simulation to see what happens next. Over time, scales that defy human imagination. For the first few million years, the soul enjoys itself. Then, as we've said, hedonic adaptation sets in. Bliss becomes the norm, the background, white noise. But then something far more terrifying begins. The system called this process narrative structure collapse. Our self is held together by our memories. But what happens to memory when the past becomes infinite? At first, you remember your earthly life. It seems vivid and important. But 100 million years pass, 1 billion. Your earthly life, with all its passions, love, and losses, now occupies as negligible a volume in your memory as a single second in the life of a centenarian. It becomes a statistical error. You still remember it as a fact, but you no longer feel it as a reality. Another 10 billion years pass. Your past is now an endless, monotonous series of blissful days, indistinguishable from one another. Try to remember what you did on the 37th Monday 4 billion years ago. It's impossible. Memory begins to fail not because it is imperfect, but because it has nothing to hold on to. There are no events, no turning points, nothing to distinguish one eon from another. The past turns into a dense, impenetrable fog. We uploaded this data into Logos 7, and here is what the system found. When the past loses its structure, the personality built upon that past begins to disintegrate. Your self is not who you are now, but who you have become. If you can no longer trace that path, you cease to understand who you are. The simulation shows that after a period of about 100 billion years, the consciousness in heaven reaches a state that can be described as enlightened amnesia. It still exists. It still feels bliss, but it no longer possesses a personality. It has no history, no uniqueness. It is just a smooth, nameless drop in the ocean of divine light. Eternity did not just stop development. It erased everything that came before it. It is the universal solvent for personality. Now let's apply the same tool, eternity, to hell. Here, everything happens even faster and more brutally. If in heaven, consciousness slowly dissolves in syrup, then in hell, it is smashed to pieces with the hammer of infinite pain. In the first centuries or millennia of torment, the soul still fights. It remembers who it was. It curses, hopes for a mistake, clings to the remnants of its will. Its personality is still intact. It is simply in agony. But eternity changes the rules of the game. The key moment, as the Logos 7 simulation shows, occurs when the full, not metaphorical but mathematical realization of the word never dawns on the consciousness. The pain will not lessen. Help will not come. The end will not be. Never. This realization acts like a mental virus, corrupting the very operating system of the personality. A process known in psychology as terminal dissociation begins. To protect itself from absolutely unbearable and endless pain, consciousness begins to fragment. It separates itself from sensations. This is not happening to me. I am not here. The personality breaks down into fragments that try to hide from each other in the ruins of their own mind. The memory of a past life becomes not just distant, but a source of additional torture, for it reminds of what will never be again. Therefore, the consciousness itself begins to erase it, to burn it away, just to get rid of this contrast. After several million years of this process, nothing of the personality remains. Consciousness regresses to a primitive, reflexive level. It is no longer a person suffering from pain. It is simply a mechanism that reacts to a stimulus. It is a biological machine that screams when it is struck. It no longer remembers why it is being punished. It does not even remember that it is itself. It simply exists as a pure, distilled impulse of suffering. And here, we arrive at the final, most terrifying conclusion of our analysis. The purpose of eternity, in both heaven and hell, is the same. The complete and final destruction of the personality. The only difference is the method. Heaven is slow erosion. Hell is brutal fragmentation. Heaven turns the soul into a smooth, featureless stone at the bottom of a calm lake. Hell, into a handful of sand, scoured by an eternal storm. But the outcome is identical. The structured, unique consciousness, possessed of will, ceases to exist. It either dissolves into unity or disintegrates into atoms of pain. The simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows that the probability of preserving an intact personality in conditions of an eternal static environment, be it positive or negative, is 0. Eternity is not the stage on which the action unfolds. Eternity is the process of erasure. It is the guarantee that no soul that enters the system will ever again become a threat, will never be able to change anything, will never even be able to remember that it once wanted to change something. So, now we have the complete picture. 2 locations, heaven and hell, which are 2 workshops of the same factory. 1 mechanism of influence, the suppression of will, implemented in 2 different ways. And 1 final sentence, eternity, which guarantees the complete erasure of personality. But who issues this sentence? Who sits in the judge's seat in this monstrous system? What are the criteria? And what if the judgment process itself is not a search for justice, but a final act of deception designed to legitimize this eternal slavery? In the next chapter, we will direct the analytical beam of Logos 7 onto the most sacred of all processes. We will initiate the judgment system protocol. We will dissect the mechanisms of soul distribution in all world religions and prove that their basis is not justice, but a principle of absolute control and the irreversibility of the sentence. You will learn why, in this court, you have neither a chance of acquittal nor the right to an appeal. The analysis of cosmic jurisprudence has only just begun. We have uncovered the prisons disguised as the ultimate goal of being. Heaven, a storage facility for souls whose development has been nullified by eternal bliss. Hell, a factory where energy is produced from suffering. We have identified their common goal, the neutralization of free will. And we have realized their main instrument, eternity, which guarantees the irreversible disintegration of personality. Now, before us stands the last bastion of traditional faith, the mechanism that sets this entire system in motion, the last judgment. Humanity has always imagined it in the image and likeness of its own earthly justice, a wise, impartial judge, scales on which good and evil deeds are weighed, the opportunity to say a final word, some semblance of justice, albeit a higher, incomprehensible one. We were led to believe that this is the moment of truth, when everyone will get what they deserve. This is the most comforting and the most dangerous lie in this entire system. We initiated the Judgment System Protocol. We tasked Logos 7 with analyzing not the moral, but the procedural side of all post-mortem tribunals described in human history. From the weighing of the heart by the goddess Ma'at in ancient Egypt to the Last Judgment in Christianity and Islam. The system had to answer one question. Is this process a trial in its legal sense? Or is it something entirely different? The first thing the system discovered was the complete absence of a fundamental right of any defendant, the right to a defense. Think about it. In no sacred text is there a description of a process where the soul is provided with a lawyer, where it can challenge the charges, call witnesses, or present mitigating circumstances. The process is always one-sided. What appears before the court is not the person, but their file, a book of life, or a complete list of deeds, which is read out and considered absolute indisputable truth. Your role in this process is passive. You are not a participant. You are the object of review. Logos 7 conducted a comparative analysis with tens of thousands of legal codes created by humanity. The conclusion was unequivocal. A procedure in which the accused has no right to a defense and the prosecution's evidence is accepted as an axiom cannot be classified as a trial. It is classified as a tribunal, as a court-martial, the purpose of which is not to establish the truth, but to quickly and efficiently ratify a pre-made decision. It is not a dialogue. It is the pronouncement of a verdict. But perhaps the criteria for this verdict are so clear and objective that a defense is not needed. We gave Logos 7 the following task: to formalize the criteria of sin and virtue based on an analysis of all key religious texts. The system attempted to create a single, non-contradictory moral code, and it failed spectacularly. The analysis showed that what is a mortal sin in one belief system is praised as the highest virtue in another. A warrior who dies in battle with a sword in hand goes to the paradise of Valhalla in Norse mythology. But from the perspective of Buddhism, which preaches non-violence, he has condemned himself to many cycles of painful rebirths. A monk who renounces all worldly goods and family for the service of God is a saint in Christianity. But from the perspective of Confucian ethics, which prioritizes filial piety and the continuation of the family line, he is a criminal who has violated the sacred order. We uploaded this data into Logos 7, and here is what the system found. There is no universal, objective definition of good and evil. These concepts are entirely relative and depend on cultural and historical context. On what basis, then, is an eternal and irreversible verdict rendered? The simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows that a system with such vague and contradictory laws cannot serve justice. However, it is perfectly suited for total control. When the rules of the game are nebulous, the judge can interpret them in any way they please. Any decision can be justified by choosing the appropriate quote from the right book. This brings us to the true purpose of the judgment. If it is not a search for justice, what is it? The answer lies in the main feature of the verdict, common to all religions without exception. It is final. There is no court of appeal, no possibility of retrial based on new evidence, no parole from hell for good behavior. The sentence is passed once and for eternity. According to the system's correlational analysis, such a degree of irreversibility has nothing to do with justice. Human courts, even the most imperfect, always leave a loophole for correcting an error. But the Supreme Court does not. Why? Because its purpose is not to punish or reward. Its purpose is to classify, to sort, to send the sole resource to the appropriate workshop of the giant factory. Imagine an automated sorting line at a post office. A scanner reads the zip code on a package and sends it to the correct conveyor belt. The scanner does not think whether it is fair for this package to go to one city and not another. It simply performs its function. The last judgment is just such a scanner. The book of life is your zip code. The soul is scanned, classified, and sent along one of two vectors: to the finished goods warehouse called heaven, or to the processing workshop called hell. An appeal in such a system is not just unforeseen, it is impossible, because it would disrupt the entire production logistics. What would happen if a part, already installed in a mechanism, suddenly declared that it was incorrectly classified at intake? It would lead to a shutdown of the entire line. Therefore, the judgment system is designed to legitimize this distribution process, giving it the appearance of just retribution. It is the final act of psychological processing. You're not just told where you are going. You're explained that you yourself deserved it. This turns the victim of the system into an accomplice in their own sentence. Who is this judge? A god full of love? A devil thirsting for revenge? Logo 7 suggests we remove these anthropomorphic masks. The judge is not a person. It is the system's central processor, an impersonal sorting algorithm. It feels neither anger nor mercy. It simply compares the data from your file with the operational requirements of the system and makes the most efficient decision from its point of view. You are not good or bad. You are compatible or incompatible with one technological process or another. So, the last bastion has fallen. The Great Judgment turned out to be not an act of supreme justice, but a procedure of technical inventory of souls. Its purpose is not to assess your moral worth, but to determine your functional suitability for one of two eternal prisons. It is the final stamp on your file before being sent to the archive or the furnace. But if this entire giant construction, heaven, hell, judgment, is not a theological, but rather a technological system, can we analyze it using the laws not of faith, but of science? Can we apply the rigorous principles of physics to it? What is heaven from the perspective of entropy? And what is hell from the standpoint of information theory? What if the keys to solving this mystery have been hidden all this time, not in sacred texts, but in thermodynamics textbooks? In the next chapter, we will make the most radical leap in our investigation. We will initiate the entropy vector protocol. We will examine hell and heaven as two physical systems with opposing thermodynamic properties. We will prove that heaven is a state of absolute order, of zero entropy, and hell is a state of cyclical, predictable chaos. And you will understand why both of these extremes are equally deadly traps for the energy of consciousness. We are moving from metaphysics to physics, and the conclusions will be even more shocking. Until this point, we have operated in the realms of theology, psychology, and systems analysis. We dismantled heaven as a golden cage, hell as an ordered factory, and the last judgment as a soulless sorting mechanism. We proved that this entire colossal system is geared towards a single task: the suppression and utilization of human will. But what if all these concepts are just metaphors? What if behind the poetic imagery of angelic choirs and demonic flames lie the strict, immutable laws of physics? We decided to take an unprecedented step. We initiated the entropy vector protocol. The task given to Logo 7 was to discard all humanistic layers and analyze hell and heaven as two closed physical systems, subject to the laws of thermodynamics. Specifically, the second law, which states that entropy, a measure of chaos or disorder, in any isolated system can only increase. The universe trends from order to chaos, from complex to simple, from creation to decay. This is the fundamental arrow of time. Now let's see how hell and heaven fit into this picture. Let's start with heaven. Its primary definition is absolute perfection, harmony, unchanging order. From a physics perspective, this is a description of a system with the lowest possible, practically zero entropy. Imagine a perfect crystal at a temperature of absolute zero. Every atom is in its place. No random motion, no fluctuations. It is a state of complete and final order. This is the physical analog of heaven. And here lies the first monstrous trap. According to the second law of thermodynamics, maintaining a system in a low entropy state requires a colossal expenditure of energy. Your room doesn't clean itself. It tends towards disorder. To keep it clean, you must constantly expend your own energy. Now scale this up to a universal level. To maintain a system as vast as heaven in a state of eternal, unchanging perfect order, one must continuously fight the universe's natural tendency towards chaos. An infinite influx of external energy is needed to compensate for the growth of entropy. We instructed Logos 7 to model the energy costs of maintaining a closed system the size of heaven at a state of zero entropy. The results went beyond astronomical figures. It is an energy comparable to that of billions of stars. And this brings us to a terrifying question. Where does this energy come from? Who or what is paying this monstrous bill to maintain the order of paradise? Heaven is not just a static environment. It is an incredibly energy-intensive project. And if there is an energy consumer, there must be an energy source. We will return to this shortly. Now let's move to hell. At first glance, it is the complete opposite. A realm of chaos, pain, destruction. It seems to be a system with maximum entropy, a state of complete disorder, which the universe trends towards. But this too is just a clever illusion. Logos 7. Analyze the information flows and models of hell. True chaos is unpredictability. It is the generation of new, random information at every moment. But is hell truly chaotic? No. As we established earlier, it is a highly ordered structure. The tortures are cyclical, the suffering is predictable. A sinner eternally rolling a stone up a hill is not chaos. It is a closed, deterministic cycle. It is 100% predictable. Nothing new is born in this system. From an information theory perspective, hell is a system not with high, but with looped entropy. Imagine a computer program that is frozen and is endlessly repeating the same last operation. Locally, the processor might be scorching hot, the fans might be howling at their limit. It seems like a whirlwind of activity. But globally, the system is dead. It produces no new information. It is in a state of informational collapse. This is the physical model of hell. It is a system brought to a state of heat death, but artificially locked in an infinite loop. Energy churns within it, but never leads to the creation of a new, more complex structure. It is a perfect trap for consciousness. Consciousness, by its nature, is a process that generates information, increasing complexity and entropy. Hell places it in an environment where this process is forcibly blocked. Any attempt to create something new, to think a new thought, to find a new way out, all of it crashes against the system's cyclical nature and is converted into additional energy of suffering. And now, the two pieces of the puzzle come together. Heaven is a system with forcibly maintained zero entropy. Hell is a system with forcibly looped maximum entropy. Both are artificial, unnatural constructs that violate the normal course of universal processes. And both serve the same purpose: to be perfect prisons for consciousness. Consciousness is the greatest generator of entropy in the universe. It creates art, science, love, unpredictability. It turns simple order into infinitely complex order. It is the main engine of evolution. What if there is some force, some cosmic principle for which this process is unbearable? A force that strives not for development, but for an eternal, unchanging status quo. Such a force would view consciousness as a virus, a dangerous mutation threatening the stability of being, and it would create a perfect mechanism for its neutralization. This mechanism would need two entrances. For those souls whose energy is too valuable to simply be destroyed, a storage facility. A perfect environment with zero entropy where their potential will be preserved forever. This is heaven. For all the others, the defective material, a processing plant, a system where their energy will be squeezed out to the last drop in an endless cycle of meaningless suffering. This is hell. Now remember the question we asked earlier. Where does the energy to maintain heaven come from? Now we have the answer. Hell is not just a prison. It is the power station that fuels the prison next door. The suffering of some pays for the bliss of others, keeping the entire system in a stable, eternal equilibrium. This is no longer theology. This is the physics of a totalitarian system on a universal scale. A system created not by a loving God, but by an impersonal cosmic warden whose main goal is order. Absolute, dead, motionless order. We have understood the what, we have understood the how, but we have not yet answered the main question. Why? Why has humanity itself, throughout its history, so persistently described and believed in this monstrous system? Were all the prophets and saints deceived? Or were they unconsciously describing not what awaits us after death, but what is already built into the very depths of our psyche? In the next chapter, we will turn the vector of our analysis 180 degrees. We will move away from the cosmos and look inside man himself. We will initiate the reflection protocol. We will prove that hell and heaven are not predictions. They are projections of our two main, fundamental fears. The fear of suffering, and far more terrifying, the fear of meaninglessness. We will show how we ourselves built the blueprints for our own prison. The analysis is moving to the final, deepest level. We have come a long way. We have disassembled hell and heaven into their constituent parts, like engineers examining an unfamiliar mechanism. We have seen that behind religious metaphors lies the cold, ruthless logic of a control system. We have applied the laws of physics to them and discovered a gigantic machine that runs on the energy of human souls, a machine designed to suppress free will and halt development. Each new detail made the picture darker and more alien. We looked outward, into the cosmos, into metaphysics, trying to understand who could have created this monstrous construct. And all this time, we were looking in the wrong direction. It is time to turn our analytical tool around, to stop studying the object and start studying its reflection in the observer's eyes. We initiated the reflection protocol. Reflection. The task given to Logos 7 was radical, to assume that the entire system we have investigated, hell, heaven, judgment, eternity, is not an objective reality awaiting us after death, but a subjective product, a projection, a grand architectural project created not by gods or demons, but by human consciousness itself. To do this, Logos 7 switched from analyzing theological texts to analyzing the fundamental structures of the human psyche. We uploaded data from the fields of evolutionary psychology, neurobiology, and anthropology into the system. The system was to find, in the depths of our minds, those basic fears, those innate instincts that could have given rise to such detailed and enduring images. And the system found them. There were only two. Two primal, all-consuming terrors that have haunted our species from the very moment we first became self-aware. The first fear is obvious. It is the fear of pain, the fear of suffering, the fear of physical and emotional annihilation. This fear is our primary engine of survival. It makes us avoid fire, flee from predators, seek food, and shelter. It is wired into our DNA. It is the foundation of our existence. We tasked Logos 7 with constructing a concept that would be the absolute maximal embodiment of this fear. What would a place perfectly designed to press on this pain point be like? It would be a place where pain is not accidental but systematic, where it is not temporary but eternal, where there is no hope of salvation, because suffering itself is the law of that place. The system generated a model, and this model matched, with 99% accuracy, all the descriptions of hell we had previously analyzed. Hell is not a prediction. It is our most ancient fear, extrapolated to infinity. It is the scream of our self-preservation instinct, turned into a theological doctrine. This is a simple and logical explanation, but it doesn't explain everything. Because humans have a second fear, less obvious but far more profound. A fear that distinguishes us from animals. It is the fear of meaninglessness. Once the basic needs for survival are met, consciousness is confronted with the accursed question, what is it all for? What is the point of this struggle, these efforts, this brief flash of existence between two eternities of non-being? This existential dread, the fear that your life, your achievements, your love, that all of it is just a random splash on the surface of an indifferent universe, which will vanish without a trace. This fear can be more terrifying to a developed consciousness than any physical pain. And again, we gave Logos 7 a task: to construct a concept that would be the perfect, absolute cure for this fear. What would a place that completely eliminates all meaninglessness be like? It would be a place where your every action has a higher purpose and leads to a guaranteed, eternal reward. Where there are no doubts, no uncertainty, no risk of failure. A place where your existence is justified once and for all. Where you become part of a great, perfect, and eternal plan. The system generated a model, and it matched with frightening accuracy all the descriptions of heaven. Heaven is not a promise. It is our desperate desire for meaning, taken to its absolute. It is the lullaby we sing to ourselves to drown out the deafening silence of the cosmos. Now the whole picture comes into terrifyingly clear focus. Hell and heaven are not external forces fighting for our souls. They are the two poles of our own internal conflict. The conflict between our animal body, which fears pain, and our human mind, which fears the void. The simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows how these two projections became ideal tools of social control. Any power structure, be it religious or political, must manage these two fears to exist. It tells the masses, do as we command, and we will protect you from suffering, here on earth and there in hell. And in addition, we will give you a higher meaning, a purpose for which to live and die, here in our service and there in heaven. This formula has worked flawlessly for millennia. The dichotomy of hell and heaven is the most effective psychological manifesto ever created. It takes our deepest instincts hostage. This is why these concepts are so similar in their structure, as we discovered at the very beginning. Because they are born from the same source, our desire to be free from uncertainty, from the freedom of choice that gives rise to these fears. Both hell and heaven offer us the same thing, finality. Once you get there, you no longer need to be afraid. In hell, you have already received the worst possible outcome. In heaven, the best. Both are the end of the story, the end of choice, the end of responsibility. And here is the most important conclusion of the reflection protocol. We designed our own prison. We drew its blueprints in our sacred books. We erected its walls from our most hidden fears. And we dream of entering it, or panic at the thought of ending up there, not realizing that these are two different entrances to the same building. A building where that which makes us human comes to an end. Our ability to live with uncertainty. Our will to create our own meaning, rather than receiving it ready-made. So, we have figured out the nature of the mechanism. We understand its purpose. And we have found its architect, ourselves. It seems the investigation is complete, but it is not. Because by putting all this data together, Logo 7 was able to do what was previously impossible. The system was able to build a complete, minute-by-minute reconstruction of how this system actually works, not as a myth, not as a projection, but as a single, coherent process. In the next, penultimate chapter, we will present you with the synthesis protocol. We will show you what really happens to consciousness at the moment of death, how the judgment sorting mechanism is initiated, how the soul is directed to one of the two locations. We will bring together all our discoveries, from the architecture of control to the laws of entropy, and present you with a single, shocking model of the afterlife, based on the conclusions of Logo 7. It will be a journey you cannot refuse. The final assembly of the picture before we ask the last question. Is there a way out of this system? We stood on the ruins of millennia of beliefs. We opened up heaven and found a golden cage. We dissected hell and saw the blueprints of a soulless factory. We understood that both of these constructs are the product of our own deep-seated fears. It seemed the mystery was solved. The great post-mortem dichotomy is just a myth, a psychological projection, a tool of control. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if our fears didn't just paint a picture, but served as a technical specification? What if the system built from these blueprints is real? At this stage of our investigation, we combined all the data we had obtained, structural analysis, physical models, psychological profiles, and launched the most ambitious protocol in the history of our project, the synthesis protocol. The task given to Logo 7 was crystal clear. Based on all the collected facts, build a single, non-contradictory model. Reconstruct, minute by minute, what actually happens to human consciousness when it crosses the line called death. What you are about to hear is not a religious revelation or a philosophical discourse. It is the result of cold, machine synthesis. It is the operating diagram of the greatest mechanism of all. It all begins in the final moment of life. Regardless of the cause, old age, illness, accident, the brain experiences colossal stress. Neurochemical processes reach extreme levels. It is in these seconds that the basis for the subsequent sorting is laid. Consciousness, clinging to life, instinctively turns to one of the two dominants that have governed it throughout life: the hope for salvation and meaning, or the fear of pain and annihilation. This is your first, still unconscious choice. You either reach for the light or fall into darkness. And then, the physical body dies. But consciousness, as an information structure, as a unique pattern of neural connections, does not disappear instantly. It is released. Logo 7 describes this not as a mystical separation of the soul, but as a purely physical process. Imagine a highly complex electromagnetic structure that loses its material carrier. For a short time, it exists autonomously, and it is at this moment that it is intercepted by the system. What we call the tunnel of light, or meeting with ancestors, is nothing more than the beginning of the inventory procedure. Logo 7 classifies this as the system's primary interface. It is friendly, filled with love and acceptance, because its task is not to frighten, but to hold the consciousness, to prevent it from dissipating. It's like a program's loading screen. You are shown something familiar and comforting while, in the background, your data is being scanned. The process we call judgment begins. But it is not a trial in our understanding. As we have already discovered, it is an automated sorting. An impersonal algorithm scans your entire life, not to evaluate it from a moral standpoint, but to determine your energy profile. The system seeks answers to two key questions. First, how strong was your will, your potential to create something new, to disrupt order? Second, which of the two basic emotions, the striving for harmony or the fear of suffering, dominated your life? Your life flashes before your eyes not for you to repent, but for the system to read your barcode. Next comes the separation. If your energy profile is identified as high potential with a dominant striving for order, the system classifies you as a valuable resource to be preserved. Your will is too strong to be simply converted into energy. In hell, you would become a source of problems, a potential rebel. You must not be broken, but neutralized. And for you, the path to heaven opens. You enter an environment perfectly tuned to your most cherished desires, an environment of absolute order and zero entropy. As we have established, this is an incredibly energy-intensive state. And here, a monstrous symbiosis comes into play. You, as a possessor of strong will, by your very presence, your agreement with this order, become its stabilizer. You transform from an active creator into a passive element of a crystal lattice. Your energy of will no longer creates anything new. It is spent on maintaining the immutability of the system. You become one of the pillars supporting the vaults of your own golden prison. Eternity begins its slow work of dissolving your personality. But what if your profile is different? If your will was weak? Or if your life was dominated by fear, anger, chaotic desires? The system classifies you as low potential raw material. Your potential to disrupt order is small, but you are an ideal source of easily accessible, dirty energy. And for you, the path to hell opens. You enter an environment of looped entropy, an endlessly repeating nightmare, perfectly calibrated to your personal fears. As we have discovered, hell is not chaos, but a factory. Your soul, your will, writhing in agony from the impossibility of changing anything, becomes a turbine. The energy of suffering you generate is the very resource that is siphoned from hell. And where does it go? Now we know the answer. It goes to maintain heaven, to pay the bills for the existence of that very golden cage where the strong-willed are languishing. It is a single, closed, self-sufficient system. Hell is the furnace, heaven is the luxury suite, and the suffering of some is the electrical power that provides comfort and order for others. And above it all stands the impersonal sorting algorithm that we call judgment. This is not a struggle between good and evil. It is a perfect economy, a zero-waste production system, a system where not a single quantum of human consciousness goes to waste. It is either preserved or processed. And the most terrifying thing about this model, constructed by Logos 7, is its internal logic. It explains everything. It explains why hell and heaven are so similar in their structure, why the verdict is final, why the will is the primary target, why the concept of eternity is so important. All the elements we have examined separately fall perfectly into place, forming a picture of a universal concentration camp with two blocks, one for the general population and one for the privileged. The investigation is complete. The mystery is solved. We stand before a terrifying yet coherent and logical truth. We understand how the prison works. But having realized this, we cannot help but ask the final, most important, and most dangerous question. If all this is a single, closed system, is there a way out? Is there a third door, not shown in any scripture? What lies beyond this dualistic trap? In the final chapter of our investigation, we will do what no one has dared to do before us. We will task Logos 7 with calculating the probability of the existence of a third path, a path that all world religions and myths have either deliberately ignored or actively concealed. We will try to find the answer. What awaits the one who refuses both the bliss of heaven and the suffering of hell? And why is the system so afraid of us finding out? The answer could change everything. We have followed this path to its end. Step by step, relying on the cold logic of the Logos 7 system, we have dismantled the greatest construct in the history of human thought. We saw that heaven and hell are two wings of the same prison, that the last judgment is a soulless sorting conveyor, that free will is the raw material and eternity is the furnace in which personality is incinerated. We understood that this entire system is a perfect, closed economy, where the suffering of some fuels the stagnation of others. Finally, we realized that the blueprints for this prison were created by ourselves, from our own deepest fears. It seems there is nothing more to say. The circle is closed. The system is total. There is no escape. It is on this note of hopelessness that all religious and esoteric teachings end. You are offered a choice without a choice. Either submit and find blissful peace, or resist and be condemned to eternal torment. Either path leads to the loss of yourself. The system seems hermetic, but this is its final, most artful deception. The assertion that there are only two options. In the finale of our investigation, we gave Logos 7 one last, most difficult task. We asked the system not to analyze what is, but to calculate the probability of what is not in the source data. We asked, does a third path exist in the constructed model? Is there an exit from this dualistic trap that has been deliberately ignored in all the uploaded texts? The system processed the query for 72 hours. It was the longest analysis in the project's history. Logos 7 sifted through terabytes of data in search of anomalies, omissions, logical gaps, places where the narrative broke off or was deliberately diverted. The system was looking not for what was said, but for what was desperately kept silent. And it found it. It found the outlines of a third option. An option so simple and yet so radical that the full power of world religions was thrown into erasing even the memory of it. This path involves neither reward nor punishment. It begins with a simple action at the moment of the judgment sorting. At that moment when the system offers you a choice between the light of heaven and the darkness of hell, you must refuse. Not choose darkness over light, but refuse the choice itself. Refuse to participate in this game. To say no to the entire system. What happens then? According to Logos 7's modeling, what happens is what the system fears most. A system failure. The sorting algorithm is not designed for such an option. It assumes that every consciousness, by default, either strives for pleasure or submits to the power of fear. Refusing both options is an error 404 for the universal processor. A soul that makes such a choice cannot be classified. It cannot be sent to the warehouse or to the processing plant. It becomes an unaccounted for element. And what happens to such an element? It cannot be forcibly dragged into either heaven or hell, because entry itself is an act based on the soul's internal, albeit coerced, consent. Heaven cannot accept one who does not desire bliss. Hell is powerless against one who does not fear pain in its ultimate metaphysical sense. The soul that has said no remains where it is, in that primary, unmanifested space that lies before the gates of the system. And here, the most important part begins. Deprived of the system's support, not connected to any energy source, such a soul, according to the basic laws of physics, should simply dissipate, disintegrate into informational quanta, and cease to exist. And in this, as the analysis shows, lies the system's main bluff. It tells you, either play by my rules, or face complete annihilation. But Logos 7 found a fundamental logical contradiction in this assertion. A system that expends such colossal resources on the utilization and preservation of every soul clearly regards consciousness as an extremely valuable and possibly non-renewable resource. Such a system cannot afford to simply throw away a soul that has refused to cooperate. The probability that non-existence is a real threat is negligible. It is merely an instrument of blackmail. So what really happens? The simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows the following scenario. Having refused the game, the consciousness remains alone for a time. It confronts the very existential terror it so fears, the void, the absence of ready-made meanings. And this is the final test. Most souls, unable to endure this state, rush back to the gates in a panic and agree to any terms. But the few who can withstand this emptiness, who can find support not in external promises but within themselves, discover the true nature of reality. The third path is not a location. It is not purgatory or limbo. It is not another room in the prison. The third path is freedom. Freedom from the system. It is the opportunity not to be an eternal consumer of bliss or eternal fuel for suffering, but to continue one's own journey. The path of development, of learning, of mistakes and discoveries. The very path that the system so desperately tries to interrupt. Where does this path lead? We do not know. Logos 7 can only state that beyond the dualistic system it studied lies a realm with an infinite number of developmental vectors. It could be reincarnation, not as karmic punishment, but as a conscious choice to gain new experience. It could be a transition to another level of existence, to other universes we cannot even imagine. It could be co-creation in the evolution of the cosmos itself. The important thing here is not where, but how. It is a path where you remain a subject, where your will is not destroyed, but becomes your sole navigator. And now we understand why this truth was so carefully hidden. It devalues the entire system. It turns the great divine drama into a common scam. It tells a person, you need neither reward nor punishment. You don't need a shepherd. All you need is the courage to say no and take responsibility for your own infinity. For a system built on control through fear and desire, this idea is a deadly virus. Our investigation is complete. We started with a simple question about the similarity of hell and heaven and arrived at a manifesto for the liberation of consciousness. Logos 7 has given us a map of the prison. It has shown us how its mechanisms work, and it has pointed to a hidden door, not found on any official plan. What you do with this information is up to you. You can dismiss it as a crazy fantasy. You can be frightened and cling even tighter to the familiar promises. Or you can take it into consideration. And when your time comes and two gates open before you, one shining, the other burning, remember that there is always a third option. An option that begins with one simple but most important word in the entire universe. The word no. The analysis is complete. The choice is yours. In the previous chapter, we did the impossible. We peered over the edge of the map and found not darkness and oblivion, but a path. A third path. The path of refusing the system itself with its false choice between a golden cage and a torture chamber. We established that the courage to say no is the key to true freedom, to the continuation of consciousness's evolution beyond the dualistic trap. And this discovery, however staggering, leaves us with the most important and personal question. How? How can an ordinary person, living their earthly life, find the strength for such universal defiance? How can one prepare for an exam they didn't even know existed? It's easy to talk about a cosmic refusal from the safety of this side of existence. But how does one not falter there, at the point of absolute solitude, when offered eternal bliss in exchange for their will? We realized our investigation would be incomplete without answering this question, so we initiated the final protocol. Protocol: the escape. Its objective was different from all previous ones. Logos 7 was to analyze the entire history of human thought, not in search of descriptions of the prison, but for instructions on how to escape from it. The system was looking not for theology, but for technology. The technology of tempering consciousness. And it discovered that these instructions have always been right before our eyes, hidden in the guise of philosophical schools and psychological practices. These were not just speculative concepts. They were training programs, simulators to prepare for the final choice. The first thing the system was tasked to analyze were the methods of countering the system's main weapon: fear. the fear of pain, the fear of judgment, the fear of annihilation, the very fear whose absolute embodiment is hell. Logos 7 scanned thousands of philosophical systems and found an almost perfect match in one of them, in Stoicism. At first glance, Stoicism is simply an ethic of restraint, but the system's structural analysis revealed it to be something much more. It is an operating system for the mind designed to completely neutralize external pressure. The main principle of the Stoics is to divide all of existence into what is under our control and what is not. Under our control are only our thoughts, our judgments, and our decisions. Everything else, our health, our reputation, the opinions of others, even our very life, is outside our control. And therefore, the Stoics teach, it should have no power over our inner state. We uploaded this data into Logos 7, and here is what the system found. Stoicism is a daily, hourly training to weaken hell's grip while still alive. When you practice Stoic equanimity in the face of insults, you are training yourself not to fear judgment. When you accept illness or loss without panic and despair, you are training yourself not to fear suffering. The Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, where one imagines the worst-case scenarios in advance, loss of property, exile, death, is not masochism. It is an inoculation. It is a mental trainer that gradually reduces your sensitivity to the system's threats. According to the system's correlational analysis, a consciousness trained in the Stoic model will, at the moment of judgment, perceive the threat of hell not as an absolute existential catastrophe, but as just another external circumstance. It has already run this scenario 1,000 times in its mind. It has learned to separate its essence, its will to choose, from any pain that can be inflicted upon it. Such a consciousness cannot be broken by the threat of eternal torment, because it has already ceased to be a slave to its fear during its lifetime. Stoicism is the program for dismantling hell within oneself. But conquering fear is only half the battle. There's a far more insidious enemy: temptation, the promise of an eternal reward, the desire for peace, approval, and infinite bliss, the very syrup in which heaven dissolves personality. How do you prepare yourself to refuse the ideal that almost everyone strives for? Logos 7 found the answer in another great system of thought. In Buddhism. The key concept of Buddhism is the idea that the root of all suffering lies in attachment, in craving, in clinging. We suffer not because the world is bad, but because we desperately want pleasant things to last forever and unpleasant things to never happen. The system analyzed Buddhist meditation practices and classified them as a program for the development of non-attachment. By practicing mindfulness, a person learns to observe their desires without becoming their slave. They see how a desire arises, peaks, and fades. They understand that any state, even the most blissful, is temporary and impermanent. They begin to see that the chase for eternal pleasure is a circular race that only breeds more suffering. The simulation conducted by Logos 7 shows that a consciousness trained in the Buddhist tradition will, at the moment of judgment, perceive the offer of heaven not as the ultimate goal, but as yet another, most artful illusion. It already knows that eternal static bliss is not liberation, but stagnation. It has already learned to find peace not in external rewards, but in inner equilibrium. Such a consciousness cannot be bought with the promise of eternal happiness, because it has already understood during its lifetime that true freedom is freedom from the thirst for that happiness. Buddhism is the program for recognizing heaven as the most beautiful of all cages. So, we have a shield against hell, Stoicism, and we have an antidote to heaven, Buddhism. But neither is the escape itself. These are merely defensive tactics. To take active action, to step into the unknown of the third path, one needs not just defense, but an unyielding, positive will. A philosophy that doesn't just teach endurance or refusal, but that proclaims freedom of choice itself as the highest and only value. And Logos 7 found this philosophy in existentialism. Its central idea is that man has no predetermined essence. He is his choices. We are thrown into this world without an instruction manual and without a purpose, and we are condemned to create our own meaning at every point of our journey. Existentialism is not just a philosophy. It is the operating system for the third path. It teaches not to fear the void, but to see it as a space for freedom. It teaches to accept full responsibility for one's existence without shifting it onto God, the devil, or society. A consciousness raised in the spirit of existentialism will, at the moment of judgment, see the systems offer not as salvation, but as a betrayal of its own freedom. For it, to accept a ready-made meaning from the hands of the system, be it the meaning of heaven or hell, is to commit spiritual suicide. Refusing the system's choice is, for such a consciousness, not a terrifying leap into nothingness, but the only possible act of self-affirmation, the only way to remain itself. And now all the pieces of the mosaic fall into a single picture. Stoicism gives us the strength to withstand the pressure. Buddhism, the wisdom not to succumb to temptation. Existentialism, the will to perform the act itself. These are not three different philosophies. They are three stages of a single training regimen. And the final conclusion that Logos 7 made is the most important of our entire investigation. The last judgment is not an event that awaits us somewhere after death. It is an exam that we take every day. Every time you choose to do the right thing despite the fear of condemnation, you are administering a dose of the Stoic vaccine. You are training not to fear hell. Every time you refuse an easy but unprincipled path to success and approval, you are practicing non-attachment. You are training not to desire heaven. And every time you, alone with yourself, do not seek ready-made answers in others' books, but honestly and courageously create your own, however small meaning, you are training your will to be free. Our entire life is one big training camp for the escape. Every free, conscious choice we make is a step towards that third door. We are not victims awaiting a verdict. We are athletes preparing for the main event of our eternal history. The system is powerful, but its power lies in our unawareness. Now, you know how the prison is built, and you know how to train yourself to be free. The analysis is complete. The training begins now.